The Breakers, Palm Beach, Florida, a winter morning in the 1920s. In front of the hotel entrance stands a wicker armchair bolted to the front of a bicycle frame. It is called an Afromobile. A guest sits in the wicker chair. Behind them, on the saddle, is a black man who will pedal them the length of the island. One of the men who held an Afromobile concession on Palm Beach was named Haley Mickens. That much is documented. He worked the run between Henry Flagler's two hotels, the Royal Poinciana on the lake, the Breakers on the ocean, and when his working day ended he crossed the water to West Palm Beach, because the island did not permit black workers to remain on it after dark. The historian Henry Knight Lozano argues that the Afromobile was popular precisely because it made a racial hierarchy feel like a pleasant amenity, controlled black movement, sold as a ride. Hold that image, because the whole hotel is inside it. The wicker chair faces forward. The guest sees the ocean, the palms, the drive. The man pedaling sees the back of the guest's head, and past it, the building he is not permitted to sleep in. So, what kind of hotel was this, that it needed a man to pedal you 200 yards along its own driveway, and needed him gone by nightfall? The Breakers, Palm Beach, Florida, a winter morning in the 1920s. In front of the hotel entrance stands a wicker armchair bolted to the front of a bicycle frame. It is called an Afromobile. A guest sits in the wicker chair. Behind them, on the saddle, is a black man who will pedal them the length of the island. One of the men who held an Afromobile concession on Palm Beach was named Haley Mickens. That much is documented. He worked the run between Henry Flagler's two hotels, the Royal Poinciana on the lake, the Breakers on the ocean, and when his working day ended he crossed the water to West Palm Beach, because the island did not permit black workers to remain on it after dark. The historian Henry Knight Lozano argues that the Afromobile was popular precisely because it made a racial hierarchy feel like a pleasant amenity, controlled black movement, sold as a ride. Hold that image, because the whole hotel is inside it. The wicker chair faces forward. The guest sees the ocean, the palms, the drive. The man pedaling sees the back of the guest's head, and past it, the building he is not permitted to sleep in. So, what kind of hotel was this, that it needed a man to pedal you 200 yards along its own driveway, and needed him gone by nightfall? A lobby 200 feet long is built for a season, not for a stay. The Palm Beach season ran roughly from the middle of December to the middle of April. The Breakers opened for it and closed after it, and did not operate year-round until 1971. Everything about the building assumes that arrangement. You did not come for a weekend. You came for the season, and the hotel fed you. The rate was American plan, meaning meals were included. When the rebuilt wooden Breakers opened in February 1904, rooms started at $4 a night with 3 meals a day. At the Royal Poinciana 10 years earlier, $6 to $100. And you arrived by train. Flagler ran his tracks to the front of the hotel, and the rails stayed beside the circular drive until the late 1920s. Families with private rail cars had them parked on the hotel's spur for the season. The car came south with you. It waited. It took you home in April. That is the architecture. A railway that ends at a door. A dining room that expects you for 120 consecutive dinners. A lobby long enough that walking its length is itself a social event, twice a day, in the correct clothes. Once a place is organized around a season rather than a stay, a second question follows immediately. What happens in the evenings? Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you have been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of the American Beach Hotel between 1920 and 1980, the lobby, the dining room, the pool terrace, the Saturday night ballroom, and what each of these things meant for the specific people who organized their year-around being in them. Not nostalgia for old swimming pools. The documented social reality of an institution that gave some Americans a dining room captain who knew their name, and turned other Americans away at the reservation desk. What the Breakers sold a guest in February 1927 was not a room near the ocean. It was a season, with a start date and an end date, and the men who made that season run had to be off the island before dark. And if you stayed in these hotels, or your family did, put it in the comments. Did anyone in your family work a Florida winter season, a dining room, a laundry, a caddy yard, a bag room? What did they tell you about the island at the end of a shift? Next on this channel, the Royal Poinciana, the largest wooden hotel in the world, and what its demolition in 1934 took down with it. Back to the lobby. What happened in the evenings moved, and the movement is the point. Inside the hotel, the machinery was formal. The Florentine dining room had a beamed ceiling copied from the Palazzo Davanzati in Florence. In 1928 the hotel added the circle dining room because it needed more seats for dinner. Guests dressed. As at every grand American plan resort, the dining room ran on a captain and on assigned tables, and where you sat was information other guests could read. But the social center of Palm Beach was already drifting off hotel ground. The Everglades Club opened on the 25th of January 1919, Paris Singer's project, Addison Misner's design, and the beginning of the Mediterranean style that went on to swallow the island. The Bath and Tennis Club followed in 1926, financed by Edward Hutton and designed by Joseph Urban. That drift matters for one legal reason. A hotel serves the public. A private club does not have to. Palm Beach's clubs were documented for decades as excluding Black and Jewish members. Enforcement at the Everglades Club continued into the 1960s and the reputation persisted into the 1990s. By the 1950s a parallel institution existed, the Palm Beach Country Club, because Jewish families had been shut out of the others. That is the same mechanism that pushed Jewish resort life south and built the hotel culture of Miami Beach and Collins Avenue. So the island ran two systems at once, a hotel, and the clubs standing around it. Which leaves the harder question. Who built the island the clubs were standing on? They lived on it first. Between roughly 1893 and 1912, Palm Beach had a black neighborhood. It was called the Sticks, and it stood near what is now North County Road and Royal Poinciana Way. According to the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, at its peak the Sticks was a shantytown of quickly built wooden structures housing almost 2,000 African Americans. These were the people who built and ran Flagler's hotels, carpenters, porters, cooks, chambermaids, laundresses, nursemaids. The land belonged to Palm Beach pioneers, Henry Maddock, E. M. Brailsford, Dr. James Munyon. Tenants paid $3 a month, usually collected by a designated resident. Many had traveled a long way. Bahamian migration into South Florida ran at roughly 6,000 people a year through the 1920s. By 1912 the Sticks was gone and its people were across the water in West Palm Beach, the Northwest neighborhood, and Pleasant City, advertised in the Palm Beach Post in December 1913 with streets named Merry, Cheerful and Contentment. Now, how the Sticks ended is genuinely disputed, and this channel is not going to pretend otherwise. A durable oral tradition holds that residents were drawn off the island with a circus or a picnic and the settlement was burned behind them. The documentary record held by the Historical Society of Palm Beach County shows evictions completed by 1912 and no record of a fire, and no trace of the mass homelessness a fire would have produced. The author Elliot Kleinberg rejects the story. Residents such as Inez Lovett recalled no fire. The historian Everett Jimerson Clark argued that the Sticks was legislated out of existence rather than burned. The record supports the removal. It does not support the flames. What it does support is what came next. What came next was a commute enforced by rule. Palm Beach appears in the Tougaloo College Survey of American Sundown Towns. Black people were required to be off the streets by evening unless they were employed on the island. In 1939 the WPA Guide to Florida documented a 10:30 curfew for black residents in Belle Glade, in the west of the same county. This was not an unwritten atmosphere. It was policy. So the hotel workforce lived a daily crossing. Waiters, chambermaids, laundresses, caddies, fishing guides, Afromobile drivers, over the bridge in the morning, back over the bridge at night. And it applied to visitors too. When Ralph Bunche came, a Nobel laureate, he did not stay on the island. Nor did A. Philip Randolph, Mary McLeod Bethune, Count Basie, or Louis Armstrong. They stayed in West Palm Beach, in private black homes, among them the Mickens house, the family of Haley Mickens, the Afromobile man, and his wife Alice Frederick Mickens, a philanthropist in her own right. That house is now on the National Register of Historic Places. This is what the Green Book was for. Victor Green published it from 1936 to 1966 so that a black traveler could know, before setting out, which places would take them. On this stretch of coast, the answers were on the mainland. Elsewhere in Florida, Abraham Lincoln Lewis, the state's first black millionaire, founded American Beach on Amelia Island in 1935 because Florida's beaches were segregated by law until 1964. But there was one place on the island where the two sides of the bridge met in the open, twice a week, in front of everybody. It was a baseball field. From the 1900s, the Royal Poinciana and the Breakers each fielded a baseball team, and the players were black hotel employees hired substantially because they could play. They worked as waiters and porters and bellhops, and twice a week through the winter they played each other in front of the guests, Vanderbilts, Astors, and Morgans in the seats, wagering on the outcome. Flagler put a former Philadelphia Phillies center fielder, Ed Andrews, in charge of the program, and Andrews recruited from the best black professional clubs in the country, the Cuban Giants, the Cuban Ex-Giants, the Brooklyn Royal Giants. The rosters are extraordinary. Rube Foster, who would found the Negro National League in 1920, pitched for the Royal Poinciana in 1904 and managed the team in the winter of 1916. Pop Lloyd, Joe Williams, and Louis Santop, three Hall of Famers, played for the Breakers between 1914 and 1916. The historian William McNeil described the two hotels' rosters as a who's who of black baseball. The Breakers took the series in 1914, 1915, and 1916. The Royal Poinciana edged them 7-6 in the winter of 1916. Here is the thing to hold on to. These were world-class professionals in a country that would not let them into the major leagues, working hotel jobs on an island that required them to leave at night, watched and bet on by the wealthiest families in America. All of it was true at once, on the same lawn, in the same February. The league faded through the 1920s. The 1928 hurricane wrecked the Royal Poinciana's grounds. And then something else took the hotel entirely. On the 10th of September 1942, the United States Army took the Breakers. It became Ream General Hospital and stayed on until May 1944, established to receive men wounded in the invasion of North Africa. Its specialties were neuropsychiatry, orthopedics, and plastic surgery. Palm Beach County History Online records around 750 patients and 400 military staff living there under the Medical Corps, with occupancy climbing toward 1,000 by early 1944. Read the building through that. The South Loggia became an officer's lounge. The ballroom became a recreation hall. The mezzanine became operating rooms. The Coconut Grove room became a dental clinic. Officers who were patients ate in the Circle dining room, the room added in 1928 because there had not been enough seats for dinner. More than a dozen babies were born in the hotel during the war. They are still called the Breakers babies. Eleanor Roosevelt visited. So did a senator named Harry Truman. A Senate committee investigating the war effort later called the Army's acquisition of the property high-handed and arbitrary, which tells you something about who owned it. The Army left in 1944. The architect John Volk handled the restoration. The hotel reopened on Christmas Eve, 1944, and went back to being a winter hotel. It had roughly 25 years of that left. So what actually ended the Palm Beach season? Not what you would expect. The usual answer for an American beach hotel in this era is the chain. Kemmons Wilson opened the first Holiday Inn in Memphis in 1952, and the standardized room went on to get the independent hotel across the country. No captain, no ballroom, no social director, no surprises. That story is true almost everywhere. It is not the story here. The Breakers has never been part of a chain. It has been owned continuously by Flagler's heirs, the Keenan family, since his death in 1913, one of the very few grand American hotels never sold. The Royal Poinciana was the casualty. Damaged by the 1928 hurricane and hurt by the Depression, it closed in 1934 and came down over the following year. The largest wooden hotel in the world simply stopped being viable, and the age of the vast wooden resort ended with it. What ended at the Breakers was not the hotel. It was the season. Air travel took the guests who could choose otherwise. The Caribbean charters of the 1960s put Nassau and Jamaica inside a winter that used to mean Florida. The hotel answered by dissolving the thing that had defined it. The Breakers was fully air-conditioned in 1970. In 1971 it opened year-round. That is the quiet ending. Not a closure. A conversion. So what does a hotel lose when it stops having a season? If this channel is going to keep documenting what the American beach hotel was, and what it meant to the people who shaped their year around it, subscribe. There are more lobbies, more dining rooms, more Saturday night dinner dances, more guests who pack 2 suitcases by category, and more families with the Green Book open to the beach hotel listings. What the Breakers sold was never a room near the ocean. It was a season, and the men who made the season run had to be off the island before dark. And if you have a hotel, a lobby, a dining room, a pool terrace, a week, put it in the comments. Did your family work a Florida winter, a dining room, a laundry, a caddy yard, a bag room? Next, the Royal Poinciana, the largest wooden building in the world, and what came down with it in 1934. The building on South County Road is still there. The lobby is still 200 feet long. The ceilings that 72 Italian artisans painted in 1926 are still overhead, and the owners are the same family. Almost nothing about this hotel was lost. What was lost was the season. The rails beside the circular drive came up in the late 1920s. The private cars stopped coming south. In 1970 the air conditioning went in, and in 1971 the doors stopped closing in April. The Afromobile is gone too, replaced by the automobile around mid-century. The wicker chair survives in photographs. The men behind it survives only because a handful of historians went looking. Haley Mickens, whose house across the water is on the National Register because it took in the people the island would not. The hotel kept its ceilings. It kept its name, its owners, and its lobby. It did not keep its season. And it never needed to keep the bridge, because the bridge had been doing the work all along. It loses the calendar that everything else was hanging on. A season has a first night and a last night, an arrival by rail in December, a departure in April, and between them a fixed community of people who see each other at dinner for 4 months. The 200-foot lobby was built for that. The captain who knew your table knew it because you were there for 120 dinners, not 2. When the doors stay open all year, the building keeps its ceilings and loses its clock. And the other calendar came apart on its own schedule. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 desegregated American hotels as public accommodations. The private clubs the act did not cover went on excluding people into the 1980s and 1990s. The island's 2 systems ended at different speeds, and the slower one was the one that had never been a hotel at all.